Good evening to everyone, and welcome to the inaugural event of Jews for Judaism Jerusalem. My name is Darryl Frankel, and I'm the Director of Jews for Judaism from South Africa. So you'll excuse my accent, I'm sure you're familiar with Jerusalem. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we continue. Just to please everybody turn off your cell phones. And a special request from Penina, if you have any questions, please to write them down. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions. So please just make a note of them and we'll discuss them at the end. Is that a cell phone?
Turn it off.
Okay. I'm going to talk into the mic so I hope everybody can hear me. It's my honor and pleasure to be here this evening to help mark the opening of Jews for Judaism's Jerusalem branch, a much needed presence in the Holy Land. By the end of this evening, which promises to be both inspirational and enlightening, it is our hope you will better understand why we feel that this is such a benchmark event occurring at a crucial time and in a very important place. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, Jews for Judaism was founded in 1983 as a response to the multi-million-dollar efforts of cults and evangelical Christians who target Jews for conversion. We are an international organization that provides a wide variety of counseling services, along with education and outreach programs that enable Jews of all ages and backgrounds to rediscover and strengthen their Jewish heritage. Tonight we are privileged to hear from two renowned and captivating speakers, Penina Taylor, Executive Director of the new Jerusalem branch of Jews for Judaism, and Rabbi Ben-Zion Kravitz from South Africa. Rabbi Kravitz is the founding director of Jews for Judaism International and is the Executive Director of the Los Angeles branch of Jews for Judaism. Before I continue, just a very, very huge, big thank you to the OU Center for co-sponsoring tonight's program, and especially to Phil Chanovsky for recognizing the huge need for programs like ours in Israel. Our first speaker tonight is Penina Taylor, who will be telling us the story of her spiritual journey. Penina began her speaking career at the age of 16, giving her testimony in churches all over the East Coast. She obtained a Bible certificate from Miami Christian College and served as a counselor for the Billy Graham Crusade. Congregational co-leader, worship leader, head of women's ministry, and head of the deaf ministry at a variety of churches and Hebrew Christian congregations. Our speaker has been sought after to teach evangelism classes, as well as the Hebrew roots of the Christian faith. She has led Passover Seder's in churches where hundreds have attended her Messianic Passover Haggadah, and her Messianic Passover Haggadah is still in use in several churches and Hebrew Christian congregations even today. Now, having heard that, ladies and gentlemen, do you not feel that those are strange qualifications for a speaker about to address an audience at an OU center in Jerusalem? After 17 years in leadership in the Christian and Hebrew Christian communities, Penina Taylor's studies brought her to a revelation that turned her world upside down. And 8 years ago, Penina Taylor embraced the faith of her forefathers by returning to Judaism. Now, as the director of Jews for Judaism Jerusalem, Penina regularly answers questions for Jews and non-Jews alike about why Judaism rejects the notion that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. She also offers support to families of people who have converted to another religion, as well as having had the privilege of aiding several Hebrew Christians in finding their way back home. Many of us have encountered well-meaning missionaries who try to persuade us that we need to look to Christianity or another faith in order to have a relationship with God. but we know that's not really true. In fact, that's not true at all. Our speaker this evening wants to make sure that all Jews understand this. Our speaker this evening considers it her personal mission to show us that we can have a deep, meaningful, and relevant relationship with God within the context of Judaism. Exit counselor, support group facilitator, counter missionary, educator and presenter. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Amina Taylor.
Thank you, Darryl. Good evening, everybody. What a wonderful turnout we have tonight. I hope everybody can see me as I sit down here. I feel much more comfortable down on the same level as everyone else rather than behind this box. One of the things, if you get to know me, you'll learn that I can't be put in or behind a box. So tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about my personal story and what brings me here tonight. I was born into a secular Jewish household. Now, we knew that we were Jewish, but Judaism meant to me, it explained why I had a big nose, why I talked with my hands, and why I like Chinese food. Other than that, Judaism had no relevance whatsoever to me in my life. It certainly didn't offer any concepts of, future personal advancement, financial freedom, or any other thing that a philosophy that you would adopt and hold on to would hold. To me, Judaism meant nothing except that it was an ethnic heritage that I had. It was something old and ancient, something to be remembered, perhaps, but certainly nothing worth embracing, nothing that I could hang a hat on, so to speak. It was within this environment that I grew up. I had the privilege of attending a Hebrew day school for 2 years. It was because of the kindness and graciousness of the rabbis of the community that we lived in that I was allowed to go to these schools, into the school. But unfortunately, nothing I learned there stuck because it wasn't being reinforced at home. It made no sense to me. So, because of some childhood traumas and other things that went on, by the time I reached high school, I reached a very difficult place in my life. I didn't think that there was any hope, that there was any light at the end of the tunnel. I just knew that my life was going down deeper and deeper into this abyss that I was in. It was in this context that I met a girl in my high school PE class. PE stands for physical education. And she told me that she understood exactly what was going on. She understood why I was hopeless, why I felt like there was nothing worth living for. She said that I was no different from anyone else because we were all sinners, and that what I needed was a relationship with God. Now, she was right. At the time, I didn't know, but I recognized that what she said was the truth, and I was introduced to God and Jesus. And so in high school, I accepted Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior. Excuse me. So in high school, I became a Christian. And you know what? It was very interesting because my embracing this new faith gave me a strength to do things I never thought I could have done before. It gave me a hope. It gave me a purpose for my life. It gave me a reason to stop smoking, to stop drinking, and all of the other things that are typical in high school. And, excuse me, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my throat today. I'm sure everybody can identify with that. And my life turned around. I had a new group of friends. I started doing well in school. In fact, many times, even now, people will ask me, you had such a miracle happen in your life when you became a Christian. How can you not be a Christian today? And I have to tell you that just like the children of the Holocaust who were saved by Christians, good Christian people, my coming to God through Christianity did not obligate me to continue to be a Christian once I discovered there was a problem with what I believed in. And in a little while, we'll get into that. But I became a Christian, and my life turned around. All kinds of things changed. So much so that my mother and my sister, who saw my life change, also decided to embrace Christianity. Not long after, my father, who came to visit us, because I was getting serious about a young man, and I had always had this dream that my father would walk me down the aisle when I got married. The unique thing about this is that my father and my mother were divorced when I was 4 years old, and so I hadn't seen my father except one time in about 15 years. But I had this dream that he would walk me down the aisle, and I was getting serious with this young man, and so we invited my dad to come for a visit. And my dad came for a visit, and he fell back in love with my mom. It was really, really cool. He asked my mom if she would marry him, but there was a problem. My mother had become a Christian, and my father wasn't. And if you know any good Christian, what the answer would be was that she couldn't marry my father. But my sister and I, we had an idea. We knew how to solve the problem. We went out and bought ourselves a Bible, and we shared with my father what we believed. And guess what? He became a Christian too. My mom and my dad were remarried, and we were one big, happy Christian family. I married my husband, who was not Jewish, by the way. He was a Christian. And at the time, I didn't think anything of the act of marrying a non-Jew. I certainly didn't see it as intermarriage, because we both believed the same thing. And so we got married, and we made our way to England, where we were stationed because he was in the Air Force. Now, while we were in England, my parents had discovered something here in the United States. They had discovered a group of Jews who believed in Jesus, but chose to continue to call themselves Jews, even though they believed in Jesus. At the same time, some interesting things were happening in my own life. One day, I felt like God was talking to me and told me to light candles on Friday night. Now, where did that come from? I don't know, to be honest with you. I never saw my mother light candles on Friday night. Didn't see my grandparents light candles on Friday night. Perhaps it was from a seed that was planted during my days in Hebrew school. I don't know. But I pulled out the candlesticks that my grandmother had given me, and I pulled out the Maxwell House Haggadah that was in the bottom drawer in my kitchen. Now, why did I have this Maxwell House Haggadah? My family was secular, but we did, in some ways, keep some of the Jewish holidays. In fact, we did do Passover. But I'm going to tell you how we did Passover. We would go to my grandparents' house, and my grandfather would pull out the Maxwell House Passover Haggadahs, which were written in an archaic English that I didn't understand. And he would say, everybody turn to page 65. So we'd all open to page 65. He'd read a paragraph to us. We'd sing a chorus of Dayenu, and then we'd sit and we'd eat. Now, we did have matzah at the table, but we also would have bread and fried chicken and stuffing or whatever else was being served. Because my grandmother didn't have the concept of what we do at Passover time. But she knew we ate matzah. So we had matzah at Passover. So I had this Haggadah in my kitchen because I too wanted to preserve this tradition, even though I was a Christian, of having some form of Passover. And I remembered that in the front of the Passover Haggadah, there was the prayer for lighting the candles on Friday night. Why? Because sometimes Passover begins on Friday night, right? So I pulled this out, and I pulled out the candlesticks, and I started lighting candles on Friday night. Lighting candles on Friday night, and I was going to church on Sunday. One day, my husband comes downstairs. Remember, he's a good Christian man. And he says, I've just been reading in my Bible, and you know what? It says in the Bible that there are certain things that God requires the Jewish people to do forever. And if I'm going to be right before God, then I need to make sure that my Jewish wife and my Jewish children continue to do those things. So my husband, who recognized that I was a Jew more than I did, said, that's it, no more pork, no more shellfish in the house. But there went my ham and cheese sandwiches. But one of the things that marked my relationship with God was a willingness and a desire to serve Him in truth. And you'll see a pattern throughout my story that truth is very, very important to me. And if this is what God wanted me to do, then this was what I was going to do. So I was lighting candles on Friday night, I was not eating pork or shellfish, and I was going to church on Sunday. One day, I was reading in the New Testament a passage in the book of 1 Corinthians that talks about women and men covering their heads. Now, it's very confusing in the English. It's hard to understand whether a thing a woman should cover her head or she shouldn't, or a man should or a man shouldn't. So what we did was we asked our pastor to come to our house and explain this passage to us. It turns out that our pastor was a Greek scholar. I believe he had studied at Oxford University, and we knew that he would give us the answer that we needed to hear. So we asked him to come over, and we said, "Pastor, what does this passage mean?" And he said, "Well, it's difficult to translate, it's difficult to interpret." And I said, "Okay, what does it mean to you? What do you understand the Greek to be saying?" He said, "Well, I think that what the Greek is saying is that a married woman should cover her hair when she's praying. But," he said, "I can't teach that, because women nowadays, they don't want to hear about head coverings." Well, that was no reason for me not to do what I believed that God was calling me to do. So guess what? I started covering my head. Only, I pray all the time. So it couldn't just be a once-in-a-while thing, where I have my scarf over my shoulders, right, and I put it on to say, "Hi, Pat, how you doing?" and take it off again. It wasn't going to work. So I started covering my head all the time. So here's this picture. I'm covering my head. I'm not eating pork or shellfish. I'm lighting candles on Friday night. I'm going to church on Sunday. But what this did was it allowed a conduit to open in my heart to connect me to God and what God wanted in my life. And what it caused was, at the time I didn't know it, but now I look back and I call it my spiritual identity crisis. Because what began to happen was my Jewish soul began to be at war with my Christian beliefs. At the time I didn't know what was going on, I just knew that something uncomfortable was happening. And of course I started to receive a lot of flack from my fellow church members too, especially at Easter time when we wouldn't eat anything that was served. But something was going on. Just about that time, I gave birth to my second child, and my parents came to visit us in England for our second child. And remember, I told you at the beginning that they had discovered this group of people called themselves Messianic Jews. These were Jewish people who had adopted a belief in Jesus and had somehow found a way to synthesize their Jewish heritage with their Christian beliefs. When I heard of this, I thought this was a very intriguing concept. Perhaps this was the answer to this burden that I was carrying, to this fight that was going on inside of me. So when we came back to the United States, first thing we did was we looked up a Messianic congregation. Now, as has been the case all along, as you heard in my introduction, all the time my husband and I had been serving in the churches that we attended, serving as lay leaders in one form or another, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. And then same thing happened when we joined Messianic congregations. We started going to a Messianic congregation on Saturday and a church on Sunday. For about a year we did this because we weren't sure what we wanted to do. Finally, we got to the point where we said, okay, we can't have 2 Sabbaths every week, so we abandoned the Sunday and we started attending the Messianic congregation. Not long after that, obviously I'm trying to keep this short, but not long after that, my father saw a need for us to start a congregation near where we lived. Also maybe one that was a little bit more Jewish than the one that we were attending. Not that we necessarily knew what that meant, but we knew that it wasn't where we were at. So he invited my husband and myself to join him and my mother to start a Messianic congregation in our community. At the time I thought to myself, well, if we're going to be running something called a Messianic Jewish congregation, I should probably know something about being Jewish. So I started going to the Jewish bookstore and I got out books to read on Judaism. I started with a book by a woman named Blue Greenberg called How to Run a Traditional Jewish Household. Now, one of the interesting things about Blue Greenberg's book, she's a very modern Orthodox woman, and instead of calling herself Orthodox, she really, really likes the phrase Torah observant. And I thought, that's it! That's what we need to be. We need to be Torah observant Messianic Jews. So I continued to go to the Jewish bookstore, and I bought the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch in English, which for those of you who aren't familiar with what that is, it's the condensed code of Jewish law, and I read it through about 3 times. I also started buying books on kashrut and other issues so that we could learn how to have an authentically Torah-observant Messianic congregation. Just an aside, my father came up with the idea at about the same time, so it's questionable who was the first one to make that decision. But be that as it may, we started reading these books. And we didn't start the Torah observant Messianic movement, but up until the time that we started this congregation, it was in its infancy stage. It hadn't gone anywhere. Shortly after we began teaching, it just exploded. So we feel that we were at the forefront of this phenomenon, which now, as you'll hear later on in our talk, has totally taken over this country. And my father started the Association of Torah Observant Messianics, which is now defunct, but at the time it had quite a membership and a readership on his website. His website, by the way, was teshuva.com. Now if you go to teshuva.com, it has a very different taste to it than it did back then. But we were running this congregation, and as you can imagine, sometimes when family members get involved in an endeavor together, sometimes it became a little stressful, and we decided that our relationship with my parents was more important than leading a Messianic congregation, and we chose to leave. At the time, we didn't know where we were going to go because none of the Messianic congregations were observant enough for us. And we figured as long as we were going to be somewhere that wasn't observant, we would hide out someplace where we could just chill out. We probably wouldn't be asked to be in leadership. We probably could just be ourselves for a little while. So we joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Jewish they weren't, but they kept Sabbath to some degree, and they were mostly vegetarians, so there was no food issue for us as far as events go and things like that. So by the time they actually accepted our membership, my husband was the deacon, and I was singing in the choir. He was singing in the choir, and we were on the worship team, and we were both already teaching Sunday school and all sorts of things like that. So it wasn't exactly a place to hide out. After about a year and a half, the vice president for global missions of the Seventh-day Adventist Church came to us and he said, "We would like you to start a Messianic congregation for us." Now, part of their motivation was this. They had observed this phenomenon that churches were starting these Hebrew Christian or Messianic congregations, and Jews, at least they thought that they were Jews, were all starting to accept Jesus and join these congregations. Now, never mind the fact that with the exception of about 5 congregations in the country, the vast majority of Messianic congregations have non-Jews as members, not Jews. In our congregation, one of the congregations we attended, out of 250 families, I think there were 5 of us that were Jewish, just to give you an idea. There are some congregations where the percentages are different, but anyway. So the Seventh-day Adventist Church asked us to start a Messianic congregation for them. And not to get into all the details, but we just didn't feel it would work because we didn't feel that we believed the same things that they believed, and we turned them down. About 6 months later, they asked us one more time, and we turned them down again. And then something started to happen. It actually had been happening all along, but it started to rear its ugly head again, what I call my spiritual identity crisis. I think the kicker was when they decided to put a Christmas tree up on the podium for Christmas, and it was just too much for me and my Jewish neshama, my Jewish soul, to handle. So we decided it was time to say goodbye, and we went to a Messianic congregation. Not long after that, we were invited to a family event that was in a different Messianic congregation in Baltimore, Maryland. We were living south of Baltimore, Maryland, and we were attending a congregation in Northern Virginia. If you know the geography, you know that that's all very close and within reason. But we were in Baltimore, and a woman came up to me and said, "I've got this wonderful 5-bedroom house in Upper Park Heights that I would like to sell you." Now, at first moment, I thought, this woman is nuts. Why is she singling me out? And then I realized, well, wait a minute. I'm wearing a long skirt, long sleeves, scarf on my head. What had happened was the woman realized that the perfect family to bring into this Orthodox Jewish community, because Upper Park Heights is the heart of the Orthodox community in Baltimore, would be to bring a Messianic couple that looks like Orthodox Jews. If you had seen us on the street, you would never have thought we were anything but. Not only did I cover my head and wear long sleeves and wear long skirts, but my husband and my boys all wore kippot, and they all wore tzitzit, they all wore fringes, and we looked like Orthodox Jews. We kept kosher, we kept Shabbat pretty close to what we keep now, with a few exceptions. And her idea was that who better to bring Orthodox Jews to believe in Jesus than Messianic Jews who look like Orthodox Jews. In fact, when she invited us to buy this house, I thought she was nuts, and I knew that how to get rid of it, how to take care of the situation. I decided, since I'm not very good at confrontation, I would ask my husband, I would tell her I needed to ask my husband, because I knew my husband would tell me, "What, are you crazy?" Because the way our relationship works is I'm kind of the kite. I come up with all these visions and ideas and everything, and he's kind of like the anchor that keeps me tethered to this world. So I knew that if I asked him, he would say, "No, that's nuts. We don't live anywhere near Baltimore. I don't work near Baltimore. We're not moving to Baltimore." So I said to her, "Well, I need to speak to my husband." So I went to talk to my husband, and instead of answering as I expected, he said to me, "Well, we can go look at the house." Now, I have it on good authority that that was the first and last time I was ever speechless. But I went back to the woman, and I said to her, "Well, my husband says we can look at it." So we went and we looked at the house. We fell in love with the house. And the only thing left for us to do was what any good Christian couple would do. We went back to our congregation and we asked them what they thought we should do. And of course, unanimously, they felt that we should move into the community because who better to bring Orthodox Jews to Messianic Judaism than Messianic Jews who look like Orthodox Jews. So to make a long story short, we moved to Baltimore. We moved to Park Heights. We encountered a lot of difficulties. When you hear my full version of my story, you can get into the nitty-gritty. But we decided, since we were Torah observant, why break Shabbat to drive to a Messianic congregation when there were dozens of congregations within walking distance for us to attend? So we decided to go to an Orthodox synagogue in the neighborhood. We chose that synagogue because we were familiar with the rabbi of it. He happened to run a bookstore, the one that I had bought all these books from. And we started going, and immediately we started making friends. They were very warm, they were very welcoming. "Oh, you're homeschooling? Look, we'll introduce you to all these homeschooling families." Now, they had no idea that we were Messianic Jews. And one day my husband, who is a man of tremendous integrity, said, "We have to tell the rabbi. We've got to tell him that we're believers because at some point it's going to come out. And we don't want him to think that we've been purposely deceiving him." Okay? So we invited the rabbi to come to our home, and we didn't tell him why we were inviting him. He did know that my husband wasn't Jewish because unlike some Messianics, my husband, the man of tremendous integrity, when he was offered an aliyah, actually told them he wasn't Jewish. Many, many, many non-Jewish people in the Messianic world will accept an aliyah without letting the rabbi know that they are not halakhically Jewish. However, my husband did not. So you can imagine when we invited the rabbi to come talk to us, what do you think he thought we were inviting him to talk to us about? My husband converting, right? Or maybe about trying to get the kids into school. He had no idea that the reason we had invited him to come over was to tell him that we were believers. So my husband began talking to him and telling him about what he believed. And the rabbi stopped him at some point and said, "You don't believe that anymore, do you?" To which my husband said, "Yeah, I do." Now, in a few seconds, it took for shock to register on the rabbi's face because he had been completely blindsided by this. I began to see my world implode. All of these friends I had made, all of these friends that my children had made, were on a street that is completely Orthodox, and now we're going to be stuck with this big, beautiful house, and we're going to be totally isolated and maybe even shunned. What was going to happen? So I began crying, and the rabbi asked me, "Well, what do you believe?" And at the time, I just kind of, "Rabbi, please don't kick us out of the shul." Well, thank God, the rabbi thought for a long time. And he looked at me and he said to me the most important thing that anybody said to me along my journey. He said to me, "You are a Jew no matter what you believe, even though what you believe is not Judaism and it's not Jewish." Okay? He said, "You and the children are welcome to continue coming to the synagogue, but your husband," they didn't know what to do with him. So they decided, he said, "Not for right now, no." He said, "But there's one catch." He said, "You have to talk to this guy from an organization called Jews for Judaism." Now, I reluctantly agreed. I liken it to when you buy a piece of software and you put it in your computer and it comes up with this window that says you agree to the terms of the software, right? And you look at it and you think, I'm not going to read through all of this because I'm going to agree whether I really agree or not. It doesn't matter what it says inside, because otherwise I wouldn't have spent the $250 for this piece of software, right? And if I say no, it's not going to let me install it. So what would be the point? So we click it anyway, thinking, they'll never come after me, right? So in the same way, I agreed to talk to this guy from Jews for Judaism. Now, the man who came over is the former director of the Baltimore office. His name is Mark Powers. And he came to my house and he came in and he said, let's talk about why you think Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. My husband brought up a point. He said, well, let's take a look at that. And he opened up the Bible and he showed us how this one verse, which was a very, very core verse to our beliefs, was based on a mistranslation and had been taken out of context. The talk was not very long at all. Maybe he spent an hour in our house, but he left, leaving me with an awful lot to chew on. Over the course of the next few weeks, I went back to his office with questions upon questions upon questions, and he showed me one by one how all of these proofs for Jesus' messiahship were based on lies, taken out of context, or in some cases, even fabricated completely. Well, like the title of my story, How Many Bricks Does It Take? One by one, the bricks were being pulled out of the foundation of my faith. There was nothing left for it to stand on. And that's when I realized that I could no longer be a Christian. And that's when I came back to Judaism. Now, the rest of the story is kind of obvious, I think. I did a lot of studying. I started volunteering for Jews for Judaism. I became active in counter-missionary work in the community. My children all came along with me, which I know is a question you all probably will ask towards the end. And 3 years ago, my husband converted to Judaism, and we were married in the Etz Chaim Center in Baltimore. My parents also came back to Judaism as a result of that, and they're sitting here today, Mom and Dad. And now I am very, very, very happy to be part of the work. I mean, I wish, in fact, the greeting that I greeted my colleagues with just before Rosh Hashanah is that this should be the year that Mashiach comes back and puts us all out of work. Comes back, comes, and puts us all out of work. But there's so much to be done here. You like that? Is that a good one? And this is being taped. This is for posterity, but there's a lot of work to be done here. I'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about our third part of our speech, of our talk tonight, and about the observations that I've made. But I'm very thankful. I owe my life, literally, to Jews for Judaism, and for sending me someone to talk to me about why what I believed could not possibly be true. Stuff that I had never seen or heard of, even though I had studied evangelism. I had studied the Christian Bible and the Hebrew Bible from top to bottom, inside and out for 17 years. But my eyes had never seen the truth. And so now I'm very, very privileged to be working with Jews for Judaism in bringing the truth to our Jewish brothers and sisters. And I'm hoping that as we expand, we will reach out not just to the Anglo community, but to the Israeli community, the Russian community, and every other community within the Israeli society. Thank you for the word. All right. So for now, I'm going to end my talk, and we will take questions and answers later. So thank you very much.
It looked a lot easier to hold as bending over the podium. Penina, thank you so much for that inspirational, scary, and yet somehow very humorous story. It gives me great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to present to you Rabbi Ben-Zion Kravitz, an acknowledged authority on Judaism and Christian polemics. Rabbi Kravitz is the founder of Jews for Judaism International and is the executive director of the Los Angeles branch of Jews for Judaism. A renowned lecturer, Rabbi Kravitz has lectured extensively throughout the United States, also in South Africa, Canada, the United States, and also here in Israel. His programs are enthusiastically received by all denominations of Judaism. Rabbi Kravitz is the author of the highly acclaimed booklet, The Jewish Response to Missionaries. There are currently over more than 320,000 copies of the booklet in print in 7 languages. Rabbi Kravitz is also a chaplain and advanced critical incident counselor for the Los Angeles Police Department. His hobbies include skiing, scuba diving, and martial arts. Speaking tonight on the power of persuasion, please help me welcome Rabbi Ben-Sion Kravitz.
Well, as I look out over the crowd, I'm really, really moved by the turnout. I want to personally welcome every single one of you, especially the people that I haven't seen in a long time, people that have been part of my life, people that have come up to me and say thank you for helping change their life. So I'm really, really, really happy to be here, and also especially want to introduce and thank my wife, Devorah, who's here with me, sitting in the back. I can tell you that without her, none of the things that I've been able to accomplish with Jews for Judaism would have happened. We decided this evening that we expand and give you an additional taste of some of the things that Jews for Judaism does. I'm sure you can all agree that when all of our offices joined together and we decided to appoint Penina as the director for Jews for Judaism here in Israel, that we could not have found a more experienced candidate who really knows the ins and outs and has a passion and a heart to talk to people about godliness. It's very meaningful. And you will hear over the course of this evening, but as you come to more events, issues that deal with the theological differences between Judaism and Christianity, about Messianic Judaism, where does that really stand? But there are other issues that we deal with that are equally important. Because sometimes we're accused of being anti-Christian, which is kind of strange because in Southern California, I have had Christian families call me up and say, can you help our who have become street? So radical, even evangelical church. Perhaps some of the techniques that you use in helping a person use their critical thinking skills may even help them. So there's an issue that's theological, and there's also an issue that's psychological that deals with critical thinking. So one of the programs by Michael Sack and our Toronto I have worked put together is called The Power of Persuasion, which really deals with challenges of critical thinking. And the subtitle listed is, What Do Cults, Telemarketers, and Terrorists Have in Common? And this is a really hot topic now, especially in the United States. I just did a tour in the Chicago area at Northwestern University. Over 300 people came out to hear this presentation. So I'm going to try to do it in the abridged version because we're trying to cover a lot this evening. You know that there have been many, many, many cults over the history of many of us, the last 30, 40 years. And some of them have caused groups of people, normal people, to do some of the most amazing things in the name of God, in the name of their religion. And part of the question that I'm trying to get you to think about is, what would cause a person to do such strange things? Many of you may remember a group called the Unification Church, also known as the Moonies. Now the Moonies had people standing on street corners selling flowers for 20 hours a day. But how was Reverend Moon, a minister from South Korea, who claimed to be the Messiah, able to gather 1,500 people in Madison Square Garden in 1998 and match up these 1,500 people within a matter of an hour, people that had never met each other, and perform a mass marriage? And they were willing to do it. What power of persuasion did he have to compel these people to just follow his instructions? Another example was the Branch Davidian cult. This took place primarily in San Antonio, Texas. David Koresh, who chose that name after King David, and Koresh, Cyrus, king of Persia, claiming to be an incarnation of both of them. He had many members in his compound. There was accusations of child abuse, of arms being, weapons being there, and the ATF prepared to go in and to rescue these children, and he set the compound on fire, and 131 people were killed. What possessed them to give over their life for him? In 1978, a minister in San Francisco had his picture taken with the mayor of San Francisco because of the good work he was doing in helping homeless people get food. Then Jim Jones moved his Jonestown group to Guyana. And when Senator Ryan came there looking for his daughter, who had joined this cult, and was murdered by cult members, and he realized that the end was coming, he convinced his members to go to a higher place. They all drank, knowingly, poisoned Kool-Aid, and 911 men, women, and children committed mass murder. What possesses people to do that? Now, in dealing with the police department and being a trained critical incident counselor, crisis counselor, I've had the privilege of helping many police officers, crises that unfortunately many of you may know from having read it on the internet, that a few years